Welcome to Implicating the Real. My name is Michael. I'm joined by my good friend Joe. Joe, how you doing?
I'm good.
Love the wave.
Thanks.
We're joined by other good friend Lianna. Lianna, how are you?
Good.
Good. It's a sunny fall day here, and we're going to talk about death.
Oh, yeah. Just keep it coming. More of
Yeah.
that episode.
This is the first chapter in part 2 of Seth Speaks. And so, very interesting, meaty chapter, I think. So, what did you guys think?
There's a lot of the Seth mythology happens, I feel like, in this chapter.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, I feel like earlier stuff was sort of like, okay, this is what you think is happening. That's not what the case is.
Okay.
And sort of like hints towards here's the real reality.
Yeah.
And in this one, Seth gives some concrete, this is what's happening, you know?
Yeah, that's what I think, kind of what I'm getting at with, it's getting meaty. So, yeah, we're going to have a lot to chew on. How do we want to start?
I like this. I think Seth gets right into the chapter with a point that I thought was really interesting, where he sort of considers the idea of what is the moment of death, right?
Yeah, he just starts right off what happens at the point of death, and then says basically there's no particular point of death in those terms.
Which I think is a really astute point, right?
Yeah.
If you really think about the process of dying, there is no moment where death happens. It's sort of like a process that has to completely unfold in time, you know?
Yeah. Later, maybe we'll find the quotes in a bit, but he talks about, that the cells in the body are constantly dying. That made me really wonder, though. It made me think that death is just a spiritual choice, because I don't know, if it makes sense to me, you probably know more about our ideas of entropy than I do, but if we can create new cells in a youthful manner, which we do at a time in our life, what says that we can't continue to do that?
Generally, cell replication for us, when we repeatedly transcribe the genetic material,
Yeah.
there's this thing that happens where near the end of the genetic material, there's these things called telomeres, and they aren't all copied, and they eventually shorten and shorten and shorten. And so we humans do have a finite lifespan because we eventually run out of those. But there are certain species that don't have that shortening of telomeres. I think maybe lobsters and some jellyfish, so they could just kind of live infinitely. In theory, they can.
Yeah. I didn't know that.
I'm reading a book right now about mushrooms, and they say that certain species of mushrooms are hypothetically immortal as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
But how does that process work when you're an adolescent? And it seems to be you're actually blooming rather than degrading physically.
We have enough of that genetic runway that that kind of telomeric shortening is not going to happen. That's not what's going to kill you. Generally, when you're older, if you're pushing 100, organ failure will.
Yeah.
But that is what I mean is it's supposedly a definite cap on what you can do.
Yeah.
If you kept this dude really healthy for 300 years, he just wouldn't.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. And I think it's still potentially, my intuition that it's a spiritual choice, the length of a life. That would be just the physical correlative to that choice.
Yeah.
But yeah, it occurred to me well, yeah, if we can bloom physically, why can't we continue to do so?
I think, didn't in Individual and Nature of Mass Events, Seth say that mankind used to live 200, 300 years per person?
Might have.
But then now we don't do that anymore because it's not suitable for our spiritual needs.
Maybe I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but at one point it occurred to me that I have moments where I feel life is too short, and I have other moments where I feel it's too long. And that kind of makes me just think, well, maybe it's just right. You know what I mean?
That's a good way of putting it.
If I can have both of those thoughts in the same life, then it's at least open to that interpretation that maybe it's just right.
Right. Yeah, I guess one thing I wanted to focus on, because we're sort of run up to it right away, is there's this point where we're talking about life is a process of becoming.
I have this highlighted right here. There is no separate, indivisible, specific point of death. Life is a state of becoming, and death is a part of this process of becoming. You are alive now, a consciousness knowing itself, sparkling with cognition amid a debris of dead and dying cells, alive while the atoms and molecules of your body die and are reborn. You are alive, therefore, in the midst of small deaths. Portions of your own image crumble away moment by moment and are replaced, and you scarcely give the matter a thought. So you are, to some extent, now alive in the midst of death of yourself, alive despite and yet because of the multitudinous deaths and rebirths that occur within the body in physical terms.
Right? So then we have this I think that's a really poetic way of like putting it. Like,
Yeah.
It's really well stated. So it seems like this is sort of a correct identification of the fact that like death is not about like the physical destruction of a thing. It's about the like destruction of a process, right? Like it seems to me correct that we should identify what our self is with a process.
Yeah.
And like that's where that like entropy thing comes in, right? Like if we are a process of things happening, of cells replicating and dying, then we are really this like energy transfer where we take energy in and then we like convert that energy. And when that energy conversion happens, hypothetically, that's what death is, right?
Yeah.
It's you're a machine that like the cogs stopped working and you can no longer translate from the one thing to the other thing. But then the thing that was weird to me is that on that page, I thought that's where Seth was going. And then Seth kind of doesn't go there, you know?
Yeah. He doesn't get like into that specific point. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Because later on then on that page, Seth says, I am using your own terms here. By dead, therefore, I mean completely unfocused in physical reality. Now your consciousness quite simply is not physically alive, physically oriented, for exactly the same amount of time as it is physically alive and oriented. This may sound confusing, but hopefully we'll make it clear, right?
Yeah. I was going to bring that up too because I think our term death, there's some semantics and there's more than one meaning going on there.
Right.
And another like thought that occurred to me at some point is like we have this idea that death is the opposite of life, where I think it's more accurate to think of it as the opposite of birth. And that fits in this idea of it's part of this becoming process. So death, we think of it as, you know, if you're not alive, you're dead. But like we don't know what you are after death, right? We know what life is. I mean, there's a curtain there. Like we have speculations and people have different beliefs about it.
We do have words like corpse, right? Like I can look at a dead person.
Yeah, we know that part, right? Like this is the, you know, very Sethian point here is that like there's a part of our consciousness and perception that's tied to this physical frequency and there's a part that isn't. And he's really stressing that death is a change of focus from this physical to the non-physical focus. And that fits in with his like definition that life is a state of becoming too.
But becoming doesn't include like a focus aspect to it. You see, like that's where I'm like, I feel like these things are a little disconnected. Like I feel like Seth is using the word becoming, but I don't know if Seth meant becoming when they said it, you know?
Can you break that down a little bit? Becoming and becoming?
Well, that's what becoming is like a technical term, right? Is like you're becoming process focused rather than like essence focused. Whereas like if you're talking about a soul, you're focused on like your essence, like this immutable like thing that transfers into the afterlife. Whereas if you're like what death is the end of a process of becoming, you're saying that it's like the end of a continuous event, you know? And like the essence and the event are like different types of things.
I don't think he's saying it's the end because it's part of the becoming. I mean, it's an end of a stage of becoming. And I also would take issue that there's like anything immutable. Even the soul, I don't think is immutable.
Well, the question is then why does the soul continue, right?
It's becoming. I mean, I think what Seth would say is literally that's what we are as a soul becoming in life. And we just have, you know, this is just like the physical hallucination of that part of becoming.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is I think that's like a misapplication of like what a becoming is, I guess. Where like a becoming is like when you take things and you it's like an orientation of things together. as opposed to just a discrete thing. And like a soul to me feels like a discrete thing.
What do you mean by discrete?
Well, in that it has its own identity that continues. You know, like like a soul doesn't really require like input output, right? It's not a you take a thing and turn it into another thing. Like that's something becoming. A soul just like is what it is.
I think in Sethian terms though, like he says that even like infinity is growing. Does that square with what you're saying? Like I just feel like a soul can also be a thing that's becoming, even if, we die and that's the part of us that, was there before and after. It doesn't mean it's like immutable.
Well, the question then is like, what is becoming what in terms of the soul?
I think that's his main overarching point, that there is no end goal. There is no such thing as perfection. You're just always changing. So when he uses the word becoming, like we in physical reality usually use it to mean there's an end. We're becoming something, like a teenager becomes an adult. But he's saying we're all just perpetually becoming. We're all perpetually changing.
Right, but I can point to like food calories become motion, right? That's what's becoming. Like one thing is changing into a different thing. And I'm not simply saying like I go from being 13 years old to 14 years old to 15 years old. Like that's not what I mean when I say I'm becoming, right? That's just time passing. The becoming is there's material that is changing into different material. There's energy that's changing into other energy.
An experience is happening.
Right.
I think that's the part that he's pointing to, that it's the experience, whether that experience is physical or non-physical. It's, there is like, I guess like the condition of undergoing experience is becoming.
You are never the same person instant to instant because you choose your thoughts. So the Joe of this second is not the same as the Joe of 5 seconds ago, because the Joe of 5 seconds ago didn't hear me say that sentence and didn't parse what I said in your unique way.
Sure.
You are always changing, just like food into kinetic energy, just like anything else. So your soul does that too. You can't, I guess we'll just ignore that time is merely a characteristic of this physical reality. But even if we put that aside, you can't pause time, even if time were it's like a primary characteristic,
primary reality, or
something like that. You can't stop it. You can't not be becoming.
Right. So you are still, is the idea like your soul is still oriented in like a larger like system that is happening around you? So there is still like stuff influencing you as a soul? I guess it has to be.
I think so, because he says later in this chapter that, it's either in this chapter or one of the appendices, that your reincarnational lives are constantly influencing you. Since they're simultaneous, you cannot disconnect from them because you as a soul are part of this greater entity that has other like alternate lives.
Yeah.
And probable Joes.
Yeah. I guess we have to maybe put it aside if we're not going to also parse the like time aspect of it, right? Because that makes it even more difficult.
It's always a challenge to try to get outside of time,
right?
If that's what we're trying to do. Getting deep right off the bat.
Oh yeah.
Just a little bit more on that page. If the cells did not die and were replenished, the physical image would not continue to exist. Do you guys know, does like our scientific point of view like have that same belief that like death is necessary in that sense?
In which sense?
He's just saying if the cells did not die and were replenished, the physical image would not continue to exist.
I mean, I think like hypothetically you could have cells be immortal as long as they were still playing the same function. It's just, I think like physical existence like wears on cells as well, Yeah.
I hear that sentence, and part of me it makes sense to, and part of me is like that child that just wants to say why to everything.
Yeah.
Why?
Because like at a certain level, like, there are like molecular machines that exist like inside of cells at like a really small level, where like those molecules don't take like wear, there's no point at which they like wear out from their function. Because they don't exist on like the sort of scale where that kind of stuff happens.
So they're at this level of they're just the medium kind of.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the idea of like all of the atoms that exist in the world are exactly the same ones that existed like millions of years ago.
Right.
it's not like they get old and we have to replace them with new atoms.
Yeah.
You know?
That's an interesting thing to try to parse too when he's talking about, like, you know, later he's saying like things are blinking on and off, and I think that's happening on different scales.
Yeah.
But like that molecular level, that level where like nothing is degrading, that's more of like you're getting into like physics, where like that's like the frequency when things are blinking out and off.
Mm-hmm.
Got something on the next page here. There are overall rhythms, and within them an infinity of individual variations, almost like cosmic metabolism. In these terms, what you call death is simply the insertion of a longer duration of that pulsation of which you are not aware, a long pause in that other dimension, so to speak. So he's just comparing death itself to that frequency, right?
Yeah. And like this I thought was an interesting point, because I think like this clarifies sort of what Seth means by the earlier thing of like, if it's a cessation of consciousness, right? Like that was the first thing I thought of, is like, well, if death's just a cessation of consciousness, like I space out for a half hour at a time while I'm driving, you know, like, am I dead? Like while I'm sitting there in the car? And it's like, well, maybe, kinda, you know, like, and death is just like a longer term version of you spacing out.
Yeah, and he's not even going so far as calling it a cessation. He's saying that your consciousness wanders somewhere else.
Or I guess, yeah, the word is like unfocused, right? It's your consciousness isn't physically focused.
Right.
So it's like, if I'm not physically focused at the moment, like I'm quote unquote like dead, you know?
I had the same question, because earlier he says by dead, therefore I mean completely unfocused in physical reality, but then later in the chapter he talks about how like at a funeral, the dead person might be attending and like completely transfixed by their corpse. But if they're doing that, they're somewhat focused they're not completely unfocused.
Yeah,
So they're technically not dead in that moment by this definition,
right.
because they're focusing a little.
Yeah.
But when you're driving, you're still somewhat focused, unless you're like actually recklessly not even.
Oh, don't catch me on the road, guys. It's not safe.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess, you know, the implication there is that that person who has died and is attending their funeral, maybe we'll get to the quote, they're not focused through the physical mechanism anymore. They don't have a physical image.
Oh, I see.
He talks about, he mentions like, I'll get into ghosts at a later point, and then he starts to say things that are kind of like ghost-like, that you can be like overly attached emotionally to what you were doing or people in physical life, and so you're kind of like lingering around until you kind of like snap out of it a little bit.
Yeah, but I would disagree. I don't think that's what Seth meant, that you're dead if you're not focused through your physical mechanism, because he does say that we depart our bodies every night. So that would mean we are dead every night by his definition.
Yeah, and I don't know if he like explicitly made the distinction, like, you know, at some point there is a difference between like your ability to return to the body and your inability to, right?
I remember there's like one quote where he was saying something about like the only reason that the body like degrades is that the consciousness has just been gone for like too long from it. So I wonder if it really is just sort of a gradient of just like, if you were to out of body, you know, like travel for long enough, it would just kind of be like, oops, I died, you know?
Well, and then there's the coma thing too, right? He mentions coma in this chapter, but he doesn't really explain what it is entirely.
I don't remember that.
I don't remember him mentioning coma in this chapter.
That's what I mean. Like, I think it's just in passing. Maybe I can find it, but I want to say that he would say that like the spirit or the energy body or something is away from the body at that point. And the body, the cells of the body are young enough or healthy enough to like be maintained, you know. And how often are people in comas without needing like exterior like support too? I don't know. Is that a thing?
They can be in a coma for years
without even like help breathing or anything, or
they would need calories.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah,
they need to get fed, and then people need to like move them around to keep their body healthy. But like you can, I think there's cases where you can do that, and you don't need to have like a breathing machine or whatever.
Yeah.
Interesting. I feel like we're coming up with way more questions than answers so far. Got another one here. Consciousness, human consciousness, is not dependent upon the tissues, and yet there is no physical matter that is not brought into being by some portion of consciousness. Do you remember that one?
I remember that one because I wrote it down specifically, and I was like, I disagree. But that's just me.
I feel like we've touched on other parts where he's hinted at this phenomenon that all of our thoughts go off to like create in some other dimension. But like his whole philosophy is that we're creating our own reality, and then everything we perceive. And he talks about this in the appendix that we may or may not get to today. That there's like several people in a room. There's a blue couch, and he's saying like none of you perceive the same blue couch because you're each creating that
Right.
yourself.
So there's the question too, is like, after you die and there's a body left over, is that just there because everyone else remembers that you were there? And so they can't just be like, you blinked out of existence. They have to have something to like attribute to who you were when you were alive.
Wow, that's very like if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around.
I think this very sentence is getting to that, though. Let me read it again. Consciousness, human consciousness, is not dependent upon the tissues, and yet there's no physical matter that is not brought into being by some portion of consciousness. So I feel like the body has been brought into being by the consciousness that is now left. And it's now just the cellular consciousness that's alive or that's left. And I think it's also true what you asked is that like the people that are there, they're creating that corpse because it is part of the continuity of the system.
Right. Because like, just like there's like for 3 different people in a room, 3 different versions of the blue couch, one for each of their experiences. Presumably each of our bodies is actually just a multiplicity of our bodies, each for the people that are witnessing us,
Yeah, I think that extends to everything that we perceive physically.
Which makes crime scene dramas that much more fun to think about. Because that means that all that stuff's being staged from a higher level,
Yeah.
Yeah, he gets into stuff like that too, which is pretty gnarly. The actual like consent of the victim and stuff like that. And that's a big hurdle for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I think, you have to address it if you're claiming we create our own reality.
Mm-hmm.
You guys got anything you wanted to point out these early parts here?
The next thing I had was all the way on 120. I just thought it was really funny. We get into the idea of the sleep honor guard that Jane's apparently a part of.
Let's just, before we get into that,
Sure.
just kind of lead into it a little bit. He's kind of saying, says, quite practically speaking, there's no one answer for each of you as an individual. And then he kind of goes into like our beliefs and expectations are operating always, even after we've expired physically. And so he's just pointing out that like, if you believe in hell, you're going to hallucinate, he says, Hades conditions, and the same with heaven. And he goes on to assure you that it's temporary, which is a relief.
Yeah, right. Otherwise, you're in a weird sort of Pascal's wager, right?
Yeah. Can you outline that for the listener? And
All right, listener, if you've never heard of it, Pascal's wager. Here's a solid logical argument for why you should believe in God. If you don't believe in God and God isn't real, then it's fine because you just die and it's like no big deal. If you don't believe in God and God is real, you go to hell forever. And forever is a really long time. So that would suck.
it's just a good, safe bet.
It's just a good, safe bet. Like on average, if you weigh the costs and benefits of being a practicing believer, eternity in hell is eternity in hell, man.
Err on the side of not experiencing eternal punishment.
Yeah, you don't have to do it for any good reason, just be self-serving. But in this one, you get like a really fun Pascal's wager, where it's like literally whatever your thoughts about the afterlife are, that's what actually happens. So you have to believe in whatever religion has the best afterlife. Because then you get the best version of it.
Yeah, it's funny. A little bit farther, he's talking about how like mass religions like made it easier for people to transition because then there's a mythological formula for their understanding the whatever might be happening.
Do we want to get into that right away?
Well, let's get into where you're going.
Okay.
That kind of relates to it, I think.
I was just going to ask if you guys have seen the anime Bleach,
I have not.
No.
because that's what this reminded me of.
Really?
There's this like idea that there are like certain people who, and this is in the Seth book, that there's certain people who like when they sleep, they actually like travel around and like help like guide people into like the afterlife and stuff.
Yeah.
They're like literally the Grim Reapers, like going around like grabbing people from death and like giving them death orientation and shit. But like,
Yeah.
that just sounds very much like, wow, this is an anime.
So he's talking about there's some organization and there's an effort to help people that have died, and especially just to orient to what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to admit, like, yeah, hearing that just from like my own Western upbringing, like initially it sounds, I don't know what the word is, I guess weird or something. But like when you think about it, if I'm going to extend what I know about reality, which is physical life, like it makes more sense to extrapolate from that than just making some blind assumption or just going by like whatever mythology I've been given through my history. You know, like it's actually very practical, the idea that like, because in life people are helping people. You know, you come into this world, you have parents, you have, you know, there's a hospital there to like transition you, there's schools, everything's organization. It's all about community and helping people. Like, why would it be different after you go through something else?
I just think it's so interesting that it's like while you're sleeping, that's your job, you know? Like how
For
do you
some
get the
people.
job?
For some people. Well, like, I think Seth is implying that it's good training for that mobility of consciousness that, you know, I think all of us will eventually want in our development.
I get that there's job perks. I'm just wondering, like, what office do you go to with your resume and be like, I would like to be the Grim Reaper, please. Like, here you go.
You gotta have the skills. Yeah.
Gotta go to the Jane's ESP class.
I mean, ask yourself that next time you realize you're dreaming, like, just say, dream, take me to the application office. It's pretty cool. I don't know. And then the aforementioned Arab is coming up, and Seth goes into detail about exactly what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, we go through life with these deep beliefs that, you know, affect our reality while we're here, and even more so, I think, if we carry them outside of physical reality.
Do we want to do like just like a cliff notes of like when you die, like this happens and this happens and this happens, just so the reader kind of has like an understanding of like briefly, like kind of, because there's like several.
According to Seth.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Because Seth does this for like a while. So correct me if I'm wrong. Here's what I got out of it. So you die, and then there's a period of time that you're not sure that you're dead, but there's somebody presumably that can help orient you and be like, hey, you're dead. And then you go to whatever sort of afterlife thing you imagine is supposed to happen. So like if you were an Egyptian person, you would have to go through the Book of the Dead and do all of the different things. And then at the end of it, there would be one of the like higher level entities dressed up like a crocodile god or whatever, like in a play. And they would like put a little heart on a scale and they'd weigh it with a feather. And you, being the person that still believes in that, would be totally enraptured by this play. But everyone around you that's pretending to be these gods know that it's not like real. They're just like performing it for you.
More or less. I think there's, you know, he's saying there's a lot of individual variability. So like you could believe in that, but you could also be like at a stage where that's kind of held very thinly. And they could just like, someone could just walk up to you and say, hey, you know, I know you thought this and this and this, but that's not the case. I think it's those plays and you know, that sort of like staged event is for the people that are like super attached to their idea of what's what.
And I think there was a thing too about like in the modern day, when there's people who have less organized religion, it's actually like more chaotic for them.
For the people helping.
No, for the person who's dying.
Oh, yeah. He said it can be harder, you know, like for an atheist, or Yeah.
because they just have like no psychological grounding to like focus themselves on.
Or if you strongly believe it's going to be just blackness, nothing, I think that might have some unique challenges, I would guess.
Right. So there's this like weird like sort of middle phase where you're like, you're not in physical reality, but you comport yourself as if you were in physical reality. And like everything you make up for yourself is like very physical, and you're like in a body that is kind of the same as the body you were in when you died.
You know, as you're saying this, it's becoming more clear to me, like part of what Seth is meaning by like there is no point of death, because it's like this slow. This is a process of like you're waking up, out of this physical life. So like you're dead, your body's dead. They had your funeral, but like you're still like detaching from, you know, that intense focus and all the things that went along with it.
Right, because your mental habits are all still physical.
Yeah.
But then like you do whatever like thing you have to do to like feel comfortable with your like afterlife. And then I guess there's like this like party or like get together where like all the people you ever knew sort of like come and hang out with you. And like you get to meet your past lives, and you get to meet like people who are important to you. But like sometimes they're there and sometimes they're other entities pretending to be them.
It says, I think he's implying that most of the time they're not there, that they've like moved on. Is that what you got?
That they're busy. Yeah.
They've
That's a bummer.
That's super a bummer.
Yeah. But he says like the emotions are so important that it's very helpful to have like a friend there, which makes a lot of sense again.
But I think you reconvene with them later because, you know, he does imply that he, Jane, and Rob have had many lives together. So it's not all just bummer.
It's just like, yeah, you send out the psychic invitation to your like, hey guys, I just died party. And people are like, oh, I'm like really busy, like prepping for this like other reincarnation. Like,
No, I don't think it's like that. I think it's that they're probably in a life. And if you sent out the invitation, they'd be like, life after death doesn't exist. What the fuck is this? Like, I'm like, get the fuck out of here. And then, like, they literally can't come because they're so focused in physical reality, or they've, like, gone on to the next stage.
They're, like, too high level. They're like, dude, I'm literally, like, a god. I can't, like, just come show up to you.
Well, that makes me think of, like, the premise of William James' book, because she's conferring with the philosopher William James after he died. But she's claiming that his actual development is way farther beyond the part of his after-death personality that she's communicating with.
I thought she wasn't communicating with the personality. I thought she was communicating with just the worldview.
Yeah, but it makes it sound like, it's alive in a way, like it responds, you know, it's like...
Yeah, but Seth does say information is alive and has its own...
Okay, so like that, but it's worth saying that, like, that's also a thing. And like I'm wondering, like, why wouldn't that extend to like your friends who have already died? Couldn't you convene with I guess if it's just a worldview that's not going to feel like emotionally validating in the way that you want, you know? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways, we're just doing the outline of what Seth is saying here.
Well, then, yeah, you have this party, and sometimes people show up and sometimes they don't. And then it sounds like afterwards you got to go back to school. You got to hit the books again.
Potentially. Like, I think he's saying for some people there's some learning to do. You can decide if you're taking another life. But, like, you have to, like, account for your own life. And then you also are reoriented with, like, your reincarnations.
Is that a different step? Like, there's the, like, you meet your, like, loved ones, and then after that you meet your own reincarnations.
I think so. I think it's like after you've like kind of digested the life you just had, like spiritually.
Oh yeah, there's that part too.
Then you're like waking up to an even larger part of yourself that had multiple lives.
Right. You do the thing where you like play the greatest hits, and then you go like, damn, I was an asshole.
Yeah, and there's some good quotes we're gonna have to get about that. But then basically, then you're like deciding what you want to do next. You're like one of those kids where everyone's asking like, what are you gonna do when you grow up?
Yeah. You're on sort of like what's it called? You're on like a sabbatical. You're
like a gap year or something.
Yeah, you're taking a gap year from life. You're planning out. You're like, all right, we're going to have this huge project coming up. It's going to be sick.
Yeah. And there's a quote. I always like it when Seth says these things. Maybe I can't find it. He just always says, like, I can offer you no hope for the lazy. You know?
Oh, I have it right here.
Okay.
He says, now, for those of you who are lazy, I can offer no hope. Death will not bring you an eternal resting place. You may rest if this is your wish for a while. Not only must you use your abilities after death, however, but you must face up to yourself for those that you did not use during your previous existence.
Damn.
Yeah, no slacking.
No slacking allowed.
You must face up to yourself for those abilities. Yeah. I don't know why I like that. I mean, I guess maybe because I'm not a lazy person, and like I have a lot of exuberance about, like, you know, just going after things, and I don't know. How does that hit you guys emotionally?
I was going to get into this a little later, but I guess it's just like, to me, the whole mythology that's created here about like what it's like to be in the afterlife feels like so like bureaucratic. Like it's like interesting to me that I feel there's like this really deep sort of like reflection of like the culture of America that Jane's living in what she imagines the afterlife as being, where it's like you have to go do the grind, you have to go to the office, you have to be studying, you have to be like no slacking, like you got to be prepping for your next project, you know? It's like, and it's not that you imagine like, listener, like imagine like you could do anything, like you can make any kind of like reality or any kind of society of people who have died and are now like prepping for what their next life is going to be. But like the metaphor that's used here is like you're in a hospital or you're at a school, you know?
Well, I think those are just like symbols that we have to convey.
That's what I'm
to
saying.
happen.
Yeah.
Like, and they're not bad. Like you're getting healed, you're waking up, you're learning. Those are good things. Those are part of development.
Right, but they're hierarchical and like bureaucratic, right?
But like you said, it's American because he's trying to find the closest analogy that we as Americans can understand. So if this were 5,000 years ago, before you had like really institutionalized schools and Seth had been channeled by some guy, I don't know if he would say it's like school. He might say it's like childhood, where, you know, you're a child and all the adults in your village take you to do different things. You learn stuff.
Right.
I don't think it's necessarily... I think it's only institutionalized because that's the only metaphor analogy you can give us.
Yeah, like just the term like training center has, for us in our modern day, like has a very specific kind of like, I picture myself like in like a cubicle land or something, you know, like it's very dry, but like I think he means it as generally as possible. You're just literally there to learn.
I also don't think it's so much like grind, like you have to do this. I think it's more like you could just sit there and do nothing, but you're going to get bored as like an infinite intelligent being really quickly, especially when you remember who all your friends were and they're off doing like fantastical adventures and growing and expanding and experiencing things. Like, you don't have to do anything on vacation, but most people don't just sit in their hotel room and stare at the wall and be like, I'm relaxing, I'm not doing it, I refuse. You know, you'd be like, there's so much to do. I can scuba dive, I can do this. I don't think it's like a coercive thing. And he has said, if you want to take a break, you can take a break. But I think that, you know, intelligent beings get bored.
Right.
Eventually.
I was going to bring that point. He does say you can also you can rest. And I imagine like there's a long period that you could rest if you want. Like you'd be the person that's like waking up at like 3:30 p.m. and you're like, okay, I will actually do something now. Yeah.
Listeners, catch me being a tree in my next several reincarnations.
But I think that's the beauty of it. Even like in this life, you know, like there's times where you don't feel like doing anything, and then you just don't do anything for a while, and then all of a sudden you feel like doing something. You know, I don't think that's changing.
I also think there's one thing to watch out for, which is projecting our own limiting belief-laden understanding of life onto the afterlife. Because as people, like, stuff on Earth is hard. It's harder because we're burdened by the beliefs that cause and effect exist, and we have to do stuff to get stuff, like life is an exchange, zero-sum game, all that crap. But over there, it's not necessarily like that. You are free from these limiting beliefs, and I think even for people who study Seth, it can be really hard sometimes to imagine such like a free and infinite like variety of opportunities available for you. So for us, it seems exhausting because we're like, oh, we got to do more stuff. But over there, it's probably like, whoa, okay. So if I just imagine and focus my mental energies and emotions, I can get whatever I want. Dude, that sounds sick. So I could be like a football star in my next life or like a movie director. Like, sign me up. You know, like it's not the way that most people entrenched in physical reality would think about things.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to add to that is Seth doesn't say it explicitly here, but like the implication that there's these training centers or like this bureaucracy that you're pointing to, I get the impression just reading other parts of Seth that those things exist because the higher, wiser part of ourselves chooses it to be that way.
Yeah. No, that's exactly what I'm saying. Is like,
So it's still a choice.
sure, but in Jane's mind, the wiser person would choose to submit to a bureaucracy, right?
Well, that's your word. I'm not like, I think that's a connotation that you're bringing to it. Like it's organization.
Sure.
Bureaucracy has a really negative connotation in this world because humans are just very poor at organizing on a large scale. I mean, I work in a bureaucracy. I work for the state of Minnesota, and it's a mess. It's almost unfixably a mess, which is pretty common. It's a pretty common thought of any bureaucracy. But
Yeah.
I think this is just a more humane way to do things also. You could just let people not have a guide after they die and they can spend a long time in a lot of anguish freaking out and be like, wait a minute, but I'm not dead. I still have awareness, like, what the heck is going on here?
that's what I was
It
saying.
would be
What's
really
the
confusing.
alternative?
But yeah, the alternative is just to dump them and
Right. Well, yeah, I think that's just a feature of like the overall sort of story, right? Is that the story of like you're waking up to a larger consciousness is sort of like infantilizing in and of itself, right? It's like your mental powers right now are simply not sufficient, is the message that's being given
that's not
Sufficient for what?
for you to truly understand what's going on.
No, I think it's because we're so intensely focused in this narrow band of experience.
Yeah,
It's not that we don't have the capacity. You know, it's like we've been playing a video game for like 80 years.
Yeah.
And someone has to like help you like remember, hey, that was just a game. Remember all this? And you're like, oh yeah. You know?
college orientation isn't there because college students are intellectually insufficient to figure it out. They can figure it out. It's just more humane to be like, hey, here's a student activity center. Hey, here's a easy way to meet friends right off the bat before classes start. We can figure it out. It would just take a lot of suffering.
I suppose.
This is what I was getting at when I was trying to outline my initial impression of this as it being kind of weird and normal and practical all at the same time.
Yeah.
It's weird to us because like our mythologies give us these ideas that after death is like this mystical experience, and it follows these certain outlines, like, and it's not saying that's not necessarily part of the picture, but it's part of the picture in the broader exercise of like trying to understand what reality is at a deeper level.
Yeah. It's like those religious sort of like icons that you have play like a purely like functional role in the story.
Yeah, and that's why he's saying that like it's actually easier for someone that has a religion that has some idea of what the afterlife is, even if it's completely wrong, like hell. There's something there to work with where like the atheist just expects to be like dead forever. I imagine like how you relate to somebody with that idea is more challenging.
Right.
Especially if he's saying like you're creating this hallucination that will follow your beliefs. So maybe that's where the word coma comes in this chapter, that like someone's just like, you know, expects to be like
Oh, yeah.
dead, and then they create their like coma hallucination in the same way someone's creating their hell or their heaven.
Like they just stick themselves in like an empty void. And then like it's really hard to get in there and shake them and be like, dude, wake up.
I'm really curious about like people's differentiating like levels of power of imagination and how that would show up in these instances, or if it's just kind of like baseline, everyone, it's like a dream, everyone has like the same ability, or do some people like stronger imagination, stronger beliefs? Is it like, is it way more intense? That's our show, but fear not, the never-ending conversation continues next week. If you're enjoying the show, please be so kind as to subscribe, like, rate, and review, and if you're feeling frisky, tell a friend. Contact us at implicatingthereal@gmail.com. You can support the show at patreon.com/implicatingthereal. We are doing our best, but whatever support you can lend helps us appreciably. We are not affiliated with the publishers or proprietors, but we encourage you to get the books. You can follow along as we endeavor to dive deep into the Sethian worldview, and there's really nothing like cultivating your own relationship with the material. Until next week, we wish you a fun good evening.